Okay, everyone, I think we can start with our webinar. Welcome, everybody, to our webinar on the topic of ESMA guidelines, which are the guidelines created by the European Security Markets Authority and how to correctly label or name sustainable investment funds that are actually tackling sustainability objectives. My name is Arleta Espinosa, and I am the community manager at Radicant Bank, and I am as well the communications and content lead at Women in Sustainable Finance. So just to show you for our agenda, we will start with a warm-up presentation by my colleague Tina Minci, where she will give an overview on the current and upcoming regulations to redirect capital to sustainability. And she will also give us a brief introduction on the ESMA guidelines and what they are about. We will follow with a presentation in our panel discussion with the ESMA guidelines and a Q&A session at the end of it. And I will come back to you with some final announcements. So without any further ado, I hand it to you, Tina, with your presentation on the current regulatory landscape.
Thank you, Arlette. And we can move already to the next slide. So in order to set the stage, we wanted actually to give the audience a quick overview of the current regulatory landscape and then move forward within the discussions about the ESMA proposal and how to correctly label sustainable investment funds and as well ESG related funds. So next slide, please, Arlette. As many of you for sure know, the EU has been a clear leader in the domain of sustainable finance and has introduced different frameworks and regulatory requirements in order to work towards its plan, so the EU action plan, to a certain transition to a sustainable economy. And just to start off, so the EU taxonomy has been one of those to mention today. So a first classification system that has been intended to set definitions of what actually environmentally sustainable activities are within the economy and actually to drive more activities to those objectives and to not significantly harm them. We expect actually that as well as social taxonomy will be developed by the EU in the near future. If we look at the other bullet points that we have listed today here on the slide, one of the key trends that we can see is clearly reporting, not only emerging from SFDR, that we will discuss a bit more in detail in terms of the product requirements later, but we see it as well from other regulatory initiatives as CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that is not only tackling financial institutions, but as well non-financial institutions, and therefore as well a big part of multinationals and corporates that are actually representing investee companies in many of such investment mandates and funds. And therefore, this is as well an important development when it comes to a sustainable transition. Looking as well at other frameworks or regulations, clearly within the investor protection area, MiFID II has been accordingly as well amended and trying to bring in more sustainability related conversations around risks, but as well preferences in the advisory process. But as well to mention that due diligence has gained a lot of importance as well with the introduced CSDD, the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Here as well, more due diligence requirements around sustainability will be expected in corporate governance, but as well management systems. If we look outside of the EU, there is as well a lot happening. If we look at Asia, for example, Asia has been as well working, so the different countries have been working on national taxonomies. But if we look at some of the more closer countries to the EU, so as Switzerland and the UK, they have been observing very closely the different developments within the EU. Clearly, it impacts Switzerland and the UK as well. But as well from a national perspective, they have been working on different national guidelines and approaches on how to tackle from their side as well advisory, fund constellations, reporting, etc., and as well on how to tackle greenwashing as a risk. So in order to move a bit closer to our discussion topic of today, we wanted to again just give a brief overview of what are the different funds that have been classified according to the SFDR, so according to the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, as the ESMA guidelines refer to SFDR in many areas. So the three different funds that have been classified accordingly are first of all, the mainstream funds, so Article 6 funds that do not have any considerations incorporated with regards to sustainability. Article 8 funds do promote a certain E or S, so environmental or social characteristics, but do not necessarily go for an impact-driven investment strategy, so do not have those at the core of its objectives. And then Article 9, clearly the more impact-driven funds that have sustainable investments at its core. Next slide, please. So in order to start as well, soon the panel discussion, we have looked at what have been currently and lately the recent discussions within the market. There have been many discussions around how to meet the SFDR reporting requirements, but as well, greenwashing has been a big topic. As well, among else, the market has been discussing the situation on when actually to start to label a fund as sustainable, or when a certain ESG related name can be included in a fund generally that has maybe an Article 8 or an Article 9 driven purpose. And ESMA has accordingly drafted a proposal that refers actually to how to label funds accordingly. And to give some more highlights here, there are two proposals. The first one is in terms of when a fund has an ESG related term included in its name. Therefore, the proposal contents that there are certain thresholds to be met in terms of fund composition, on how many of those entities do meet actually environmental or social characteristics, or would have as well certain objectives towards sustainable investment in their pipeline. And they as well bind here the definition again according to the SFDR annexes 2 and 3. The other proposal refers to funds that have the term sustainable in its name. So as well, the expectations are that there are some more impact related constellations to be met. And here as well, thresholds are similar to the first proposal included, but as well a minimum proportion on how actually the sustainable investments should be included in the fund. And again, here a reference to SFDR on how actually sustainable investments are defined. And we have had as well recently a new Q&A issued by the European Commission that had given us a more clearance on what actually this means, or how sustainable investment should be defined. And therefore, we have collected some thoughts and have developed some questions in order to understand a bit if these proposals will have a certain impact in the market, how they should be working, and generally what the opinion is of our panelists and experts that we have today here. So happy to introduce now as well the panelists. So we have Rosa San Giorgio from Pictet Wealth Management today, Sasha Cesar from Radicant Bank. Radicant Bank is as well co-hosting with us today the webinar. Antonio Skumparakis from PwC. And yeah, happy to give them as well now the word. So as well in terms of introduction, Rosa, I guess ladies first, so handing over to you.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think, the topic of regulation is key because it is driving part of the innovation. I'm leading the responsible investment journey of Pictet Wealth Management. I come from experience in portfolio management, so I started managing portfolios, so investing in the late 90s, in 98, and switched into let's say becoming more aware of what responsible investing is around 2011. So I've seen this environment change and definition come and go. So happy to have this conversation today.
Thank you, Rosa. Over to you, Antonios.
Thank you, and also warm welcome from my side to having me here. I'm driving the sustainability practice at PwC, advising over 100 clients, their ESG transformation, and looking forward to fruitful discussion with very competent colleagues here on this webinar.
Last but not least, Sasha.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you, Tina. Very happy to be here, and thank you very much for the kind invitation. My name is Sasha Caesar. I'm the head of SDG Research and Experts at Radicant Bank. We're building Switzerland's first digital sustainability bank, and we were founded 2 years ago on Earth Day and received by FINMA license just a year ago. And we're providing banking and investment services, and our investment mandate is based on 3 dark green investment or Article 9 investment funds. If you want to become one of the first radicants, scan the QR code behind me, or feel free to reach out to me. Otherwise, I'm very excited to participate in this panel. Thank you again to Women in Sustainable Finance for having me.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and I would kick off now the discussion with the first question. So as said before as well, so the market has been discussing quite a lot of how actually the SFDR requirements for the product-related disclosures could be met and the feasibility therefore. So is there a facilitating element actually with the proposal by ESMA, as clearly SFDR is more a reporting requirement, and now here with the labeling requirements, do we see here a more facilitating effect when it comes to the legal and advisory assessments, for example, as well of certain funds, and maybe as well here, Antonius, as you are as well driving the services at PwC, how would you, from your perspective, encounter this proposal?
Yeah, first I would like to start generally with the SFDR. I mean, most of you are familiar with that, with Article 6, 8, and 9 that you already outlined at the beginning of this webinar. I think so what is imminent, most of the market players, and this is what we see generally, have implemented or are on the way to implement SFDR, but nevertheless, they do not take into account kind of ESMA considerations, for example, supervisory expectations, fund labeling guidelines, that is also on the horizon, in particularly that makes the landscape a little bit more complicated. And then more tricky is also the position of the Swiss government, where we see here, and it has been outlined last year regarding to the alignment and contribution topic here, in particularly, it goes really when we elaborate a little bit, when we go more into detail, Article 9 is really to have kind of a contribution on one hand to not significant harm assessment and also good governance that has to be fulfilled. But in Switzerland, we have the situation that here it's clearly showing going in the direction of impact and active ownership approach that we will see and will become also more and more important for several market players here, a little bit to outline these. What we see also on top is kind of most institutions currently also revisit their ESG framework, and others, of course, and I think so here Radicant has also done a good starting point with the SDGs, but here I let Sasha a little bit to elaborate also on these considerations, but I would say this is really close aligned with the expectation of Bundesbank to such extent.
Thank you. Maybe Sasha, you can as well take up with your example at Radicant at this point.
Sure. I think generally, Antonius, thank you for your comments and basically referring to us as well. I think those are kind of very important comments. Generally, I think sort of the new guidelines, the important clarification was that it's sort of in the responsibility of the asset manager or banks, right? So there has been no more prescriptive guidelines. So in the end, it's about for the financial institutions to kind of create this transparency towards the clients. Generally looking at, in a sense, the landscape, how it looks like now in Europe, with sort of this distinction, what is ESG and what is sort of more impact oriented. Clearly, it would be nice that Article 9 is sort of strengthened, and clearly that more capital is going towards those sustainability targets that the EU set out. That's basically what Article 9 and taxonomy and other aspects would like to achieve, right? And regarding the discussion in Switzerland, I think here the proposal from the Federal Council was even going in the direction to actually kind of take away ESG from sustainable investing and basically just include it in the general fiduciary duty and as part of risk management, and only kind of encapsulate sustainable investing as being something impact aligned or impact generating.
Yeah, I would love to, amplify a little bit what you mentioned before, Tina, the fact that SFDR was conceived as a regulation for disclosure. So the idea of the regulator was there are a lot of asset managers out there that talk about sustainability, but they're actually not creating the transparency in the reporting or in the fund prospectus. So there is a lot of diversity there. So the regulation was meant to say to those managers, if you are selling your products to clients and telling them that this is responsible investing, please disclose. And that's why, there are templates for, the reportings, ex-ante disclosure, etc. The market, so as the financial institutions, were eager to have classification guidelines. So we didn't receive classification guidelines from the regulator. We received disclosure guidelines. We used this disclosure guidelines as if it were classification. So we automatically used Article 6, Article 8, and Article 9, like if it was a classification system. So we are now saying, this fund is classified Article 8, this fund is classified Article 9, which is not, semantically correct, because the fund is not classified. The fund respects the disclosure of the Article 8 or Article 9 of the SFDR. And I think this is important because the regulator realized that there was, the market was so eager to find a classification, they used disclosure, that actually they said, okay, you know what, maybe we shall provide something about classification. And this is actually what these ESMA guidelines are about, are telling, okay, if you label your fund, if your fund is called ESG Europe, you need to have at least a percentage of your assets, in this case 80%, that is aligned with your own definition of what ESG is. Similar, in case you call your fund sustainable or something, then you need to align your fund with at least 80% of your funds, whichever is your own definition of sustainability. And here I go back to what Sasha was mentioning, is that we are defining some thresholds, but the definition underlying, so what is ESG and what is sustainability, is in the hands of the asset manager. So this means that we create an alignment in terms of those people that are launching those funds. They really need to believe in their own definition, because 80% of the assets needs to go there, but definition can be very different. So you will have funds that are called ESG, similar ESG Europe Fund Manager 1 and ESG Europe Fund Manager 5. They may have a very different definition of what ESG is, similarly to what sustainability is, and have very different, therefore, exclusions frameworks, promotion frameworks behind. So if we go back to your question, yes, the fact that the regulator is, going into the direction of classifying will create a sort of, field in which, we know what we are talking about, because we know that the fund underlying will respect 80%, but still the definitions will be different. And that's actually the difficulty that wealth managers have, because when we buy funds that are called ESG, we need to have a look at what does it mean for that fund manager ESG. Otherwise, and we need to understand if that fund manager definition of ESG is aligned with our own and what we are actually selling to our clients. So it's a step in the right direction, but it still requires very much attention from the managers. I mean, if we talk about the Article 9 that Sasha was mentioning, Pictet is globally the manager with most Article 9 dark green funds, and we have our own definition of what is sustainable investing, and we are very much behind this definition, but maybe very different from the definition that Radicant has. So if we compare them, we may have different type of sector allocation, exclusions, and different type of active ownership policies, etc.
Thank you very much. I would as well move directly to the second question, as it aligns very well. So, as you have been as well highlighting that there are the difference of approaches between the different asset managers and how they define sustainable investments within their own investment strategies. How do you consider now for yourself, at least at Radicant and at Pictet, product development, for example, now here at a fund level? How would this work, or how would this facilitate your work under these conditions? And yeah, would you consider the guidance as beneficial as such? Maybe Sasha.
I think generally the guidance is beneficial, and if there is, and I think again, sort of the big picture that we see in this sort of multi-year development of the EU sustainable finance regulation development, right, of which SFDR is an important component, and there are of course other components which you mentioned earlier. I think this is developing over time, right, and as we see now, clarifications are requested, and clarifications and further guidelines are issued. And I think this is sort of, this also creates a certain uncertainty in the market, which I think comes with the territory. And hence, those sort of additional guidelines and clarifications are certainly helpful. As Rosa mentioned, what they do at Pictet, we only have Article 9 funds. I think we have developed them for now. I think we feel very good about it, but stating more generally in a way, right, it very much depends on what is sort of the capabilities of the asset managers or the banks developing those funds, what are the sort of the ESG definitions, what are the definitions of sustainable investment, what kind of capabilities do you have, what type of sophistication do you have. And here again, I can just underline what Rosa mentioned. One Article 8 fund does not compare to different Article 8 fund, similarly Article 9 and second Article 9 fund. And also specifically to Article 9, where you clearly do not only want to aim for a financial objective, but also sustainability objective. Again, those sustainability objectives vary a lot. And I think what is in a way sort of as a meta view into the market, what I always find quite helpful are those studies issued by Morningstar that comes out every quarter, and basically also compares clearly what are the biggest asset managers or what are sort of the largest issuance of funds, where the fund flows go, and also what are sort of the percentages of those respective Article 8 and 9 funds in average, and how do they compare across the market. And this is also kind of a good picture, as we can see, now those guidelines start having an effect on the fund managers, that they're sort of revisiting their definitions and their sort of application towards the regulator and the self-classification of Article 8 and 9. But again, I think this is a work in progress, and I think those uncertainties won't go away. And this, that's only just for the asset managers and the market itself. But I think overall, the intended idea to create transparency towards clients, I think, again, also here, this is work in progress, and clearly we would like to show a lot of transparency. But this, again, varies a lot from different financial institutions to another one.
And probably also to add here, I think so what Sasha and Rosa really elaborated also before, it's in the past, before we had SFDR, there have been a lot of products that only use exclusion at the end of the day, that labels that green. I think so to not see that anymore in particularly, or only standalone. And I think so it goes in the direction that also, to be very honest and very clear, what is the impact, how to measure the impact, how this looks like, meaning there are a lot of questions even there. Of course, first, what is sustainable, what is ESG characteristic, classification, yes, but I think so the first way is not to have any more kind of products in the market that say, yeah, we use exclusion and this is a sustainable investment, and that's it. And of course, there will be developments in the upcoming years. There are several interlinkages as taxonomy, and also in Switzerland, the ESMA also outlined that exclusion and ESG integration meaning these standalone strategy, only standalone, not in combination, are not sustainable anymore for that product, meaning there are kind of, even here in Switzerland, I would say, there is kind of a Swiss finish because you have first time clarification on that. You do not have that in the European Union. In the European Union, there are discussions about thresholds and these aspects. And I think so important is also for the industry to ensure that there will be also innovation, in particularly to new products and new KPIs that will be disclosed. And we are at the beginning on a journey. Of course, we don't know if there will be more stricter or not, and in which direction it goes, but the world is very fragmented. And only we take a look on Europe and Switzerland, when we go into in the US, for example, meaning the copy-paste of these name guidelines comes from the US. There is the Name Act in particular, everything that is shown ESG, you have to have a threshold above 80%. Meaning this is what European Union has done. And also in Asia, Hong Kong, Singapore, etc., there are similar characteristics, and there are kind of basic scenarios that show clearly the way of greenwashing. But here also, this is more kind of indication of what you have to look. And at the end, every asset manager is free, has this definition, has his strategies, has his KPIs, but he has to ensure that he goes in a right direction. That's the reason why Switzerland goes with a principle-based approach and not, strict regulate, because you can also destroy the market. We have to be also very transparent on that.
If I can add, I mean, obviously, I'm fully aligned with what Sasha and Antonius were mentioning. We all know that this, let's say, few years we are in are a little bit of a transition time in which there is a little bit of a dance between the market and the regulator, trying to find the right pace and combining with the availability of data that we have. So there's no perfection today. I'm not sure if we will ever get there, but it's good that we have this back and forward. It's good that the regulator is listening to the market and trying to find a direction. In particular, you have to consider that before this, let's say, ESMA guidelines, there were two levels of uncertainty. One, a fund manager had to, let's say, issue, launch an ESG fund or a sustainability fund. There was the level of uncertainty of how much of my portfolio needs to be aligned with my definition and which is my definition. Now, the how much, now it's clear. So it's 80%. So at least that we have clarity, then the definition stays and nowadays can't be differently. It can be more strict in terms of the definition, because otherwise we will kill the innovation. So it's good that the definition stays a bit open, but at least we have clarity on the percentage there, and this is actually very important. One other thing that I believe this guidance on the 80% has created is a little bit of a passive choice, I have to admit, from the regulator. As a wealth manager, we were seeing until, let's say, maybe last month, different asset managers coming with different type of definition. In particular, there were two very different approaches. One approach was those of those managers that were calculating the percentage of sustainable investing as the weighted average of the percentage of revenues of companies in sustainable activities. So if a company had 20% of revenues coming from sustainable activities, they would consider 20% of the weight of that company to calculate the overall percentage of sustainable investing. This would mean that, if all my companies in my portfolio, 100% of the companies in my portfolio have 25% of revenues from sustainable investing, the percentage of my portfolio alignment to sustainable investing would be 25%. Then there was another part of asset managers that were doing the calculation in a different way. They were considering sustainable investing all companies that had more than a certain percentage of sustainable investing. So if I, for example, if I had the bar at 25%, so if I had in my portfolio all companies that have 25% of revenues from sustainable investing, then my percentage of sustainable investing would be 100%. So it was a average, weighted average revenues approach to a pass-fail approach. Now, with this regulation, putting the bar at 80% means that the weighted average approach is not usable anymore, because there are very few companies that actually go beyond the 80% of sustainable investing. That's why it has actually influenced a little bit the definition that we are seeing used in the underlying. So a lot of asset managers have moved from defining sustainable investing as a weighted average revenue to a pass-fail approach. Obviously, each manager with a different bar, each manager using different type of underlying. They could use revenues or they could use capex. I mean, there is still a lot of diversity there, but there is a little bit of tendency in that direction that we see.
Maybe just adding something, because it always depends, like who's the audience, who's listening. Just as a general commentary to what Rosa outlined, I think it's very insightful. But what was sort of the novelty that SFDR 217 with this definition of sustainable investments brought about was that you don't look at the investee company as a whole, but its economic activities, right? So that's why we look at the revenue share and what type of activities it is. So this brought actually kind of a new definition into the market, and with that also a lot of discussion and potentially confusion, I guess. And that's why we then sort of had to kind of find different ways how to look at this definition, right? And again, just to stress this point, our 80%, or rather actually 100%, is slightly different than Pictet's 80% or potentially 100% or generally percentage share, right? And that's really important then to consider, and it doesn't make it easy then for the clients.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Tina.
Apologies. Moving to the next question so that we can as well move to the other parts of the discussion. So we have heard now all the different impacts that it had as well from Rosa, but as well that there is still very much of a diversity in the market, even with the proposal of the fund labelings. And another question that we had is, would you expect now another impact as well within the fund market after introduction of such thresholds, meaning here as well, like in terms of methodologies on how actually those fund constellations are working? And here as well, maybe to all of three of you, so what has been your takeaway up to now, but as well from your daily work perspective, and what would you see as well here in terms of transparency and disclosure changing, maybe with more scrutiny, let's say, on labels? Maybe Antonio's from your perspective.
First of all, it's kind of when we look in the bullet, meaning the different frameworks that we will have makes life not easier. And on the other hand, you have also different labels. Now in Switzerland, you will have the Swiss climate score. This will come also on top. EU eco-labels, it's in the European Union, it's more for PRIPS clients in particularly. And there are stuff around that should be interlinked and understand and also tailored at the end for every institution and the products. At the end is to be clear, to be transparent, to outline, what you as an institution understand on the sustainability, also disclosing to such extent these policies on websites, so that it is understandable, and this reflects at the end also in the prospectus and in the legal documentation that you have to show. And of course, we will have, and this will be a way in the future where there will be some players that will be picked out. They going too far away, even in the explanation of impact, even in the explanation of engagement at the end, what percentage of engagement is at the end as a potential impact, how to bundle that. There are several concepts around of that. But I would say first is to have kind of an understanding about these three classes, or when we say, but at the end, it's really also by the institution itself to position themselves to be clear on websites and to communicate that in a transparent way. And then I think so a lot of players will be on the right track. But of course, for new players, it is difficult because it's a very dynamic environment. I would say every month you will have new updates, new changes, and more complicated is not for the players that are in the European Union and in Switzerland. They're sitting that they are globally on the way, and they will plan to have the issuing of the products in the US, but also in Hong Kong and Singapore, to have here a global approach, but also taking into account local aspects. And here we see these are the big challenges at the end of the day, to such extent harmonize. Of course, it will be an ideal world. We'll have one definition, one standard, one concept that you can roll out globally, but there are several politicians, several regulators, several minds, and we have seen that in the European Union by, for example, BaFin, where they come before you have these name guidelines, etc. Meaning, in France, you have the regulator has another expectation. BaFin that sees in Europe, we will see now a tendency of harmonization. This helps. But I will be also very interested how the situation in Switzerland will look like and how we will move there, because most are also Swiss players. Of course, they have their funds due to Luxembourg, etc. But it is a little bit to outline that.
Rosa, your opinion?
I think I agree with Antonio. So we will see a lot moving on, month by month, which is obviously a challenge for all players, because when regulation change, then you need to change your fund prospectus. Then you have to change your ex-ante disclosure, ex-post disclosure. Often those are linked to your IT systems. So you have change in the infrastructure. So it's complex, but we know that we are in this time and it's terribly expensive. And that's why also, big players are, potentially have the resources, and small financial institutions have less resources. So this is also something to have in consideration. In general, I believe that because now we have, let's say, defined what is the threshold in terms of percentage, we will put more attention on what is the definition. So we will have more transparency on the definition, and people will start reading those definitions and pick up the difference. So there will be more awareness of what is the definition behind. So this is good. It creates awareness. And the fact that those definitions will be transparent will also automatically create a little bit of convergency, because we all know that as asset managers, you're looking around what the others are doing and you're picking best practices. So I think, this will allow a lot of contamination, which is actually good. So the transparency will allow contamination. The other point that I think will happen, because we have been talking about ESG and sustainability, we are expecting a little bit of more clarity on the positive impact space, because as of today, often people couple sustainable investing with positive impact, but not necessarily it is the same. And so I believe that we will get into the conversation of what is positive impact. We all agree on the eye level, the intentionality, additionality, measurability, but the fact that a positive impact can be done through capital allocation, active ownership. So there are a lot of conversation happening even in Switzerland. And then the last point that actually also Antonius mentioned is the active ownership place. And as of today, a lot of managers are telling we are active owners, we are engaging and we are voting, but then there's little transparency on this. How can we ensure that if you are telling me that you have Shell in your portfolio and that you are engaging with Shell, how do we ensure that at last week AGM you voted on the shareholder proposal on scope 3? Because at the end, what happens is that everybody is engaging with oil and gas companies, but then the AGM of Shell last week, only 20% of the voters voted for a resolution by shareholders to have alignment of let's say the plan with the commitment. So I think we need to go into that direction to ensure that active ownership is not an excuse for asset managers to invest let's say without too much scrutiny.
Probably here to add what Rosa mentioned, I think so in the future there will be also more transition plans. And these transition plans will play a very important role. It will be not only for the asset management industry, but also for the whole lending business. And when you got and reach your targets, then this is fine. Then you can also show them to such extent your decarbonization pathway at the end, your even net zero commitment. But what I do not like is when I read kind of sustainability reports, they say, you know, scope 1 and scope 2, you know, own operations, we are net zero, and your business really rise in investment and lending, not only investment, but also lending. And you say, I'm going net zero, meaning these are the critical topics, and these will be potentially also come more and more to the agenda, beside what Rosa mentioned regarding to the active ownership and engagement aspects. But it will help in the future, these kind of transition plans. That's the reason why we'll have these CSRD, KVI, RBI initiatives, all of that, so that the real economy has to provide going forward such kind of information so that the asset management industry can work with that.
Maybe just adding a few notes. I think both Antonius and Rosa actually outlined many important points. But again, I think one of the important main messages is basically that what is underlying this EU sustainable finance regulation, and here SFDR, but other aspects, is basically that asset management banks have to look at double materiality, right? It was mentioned beforehand. So this sort of, I would say, common misconception of ESG with, you know, sort of positive outcomes or positive impacts. ESG is basically looking at risks. How does a company deal with climate change as a topic? How does it manage this aspect, right? But and impact materiality on the other side looks at basically how does a company then impact climate change or social topics, right? And together it makes up this concept of double materiality. This is at the heart of the EU Sustainable Finance Regulation and all the different components that come into that, right? And I think this is key to kind of distinguish in a sense, like what when people see sort of ESG funds or sustainable funds, in a sense, what they see versus what they get, right? This was also one of the big motivations for us at Radicant, actually only looking at or mainly looking also what is sort of the impact of the companies based on their products and services, and try to kind of only invest into those companies. So we would not invest into a company like Shell that clearly has a lot of negative impacts on the environment, among others, and clearly also social aspects, right? So I think that is sort of this very important topic that, you know, maybe some financial institutions still need to consider more. And that's why sort of the impact will be more on those that have sort of legacy investments or not sustainable or not ESG strategies, right? How do they deal with those? Because at some point they will have to find, have to kind of transition those towards low carbon future. And that's where Antonius mentioned comes in, this sort of transition, this development of transition plans, right? Where other regulatory developments, like, you know, that you have to kind of disclose climate-related risks like TSFD come into play, that you have to actually disclose, okay, what is your footprint, scope 1, 2, and 3, basically, what are your targets and what is your transition plan to actually achieve those targets, right? And what is interesting as a perhaps last point, while the EU taxonomy only sort of identified economic activities that actually contribute to the EU sustainability targets, the SDR, or sort of the counterpart in the UK, actually kind of developed sort of a transition category, right, to specifically identify transition finance. And I think that will be sort of an important next step. I guess sort of this amber category in the taxonomy, looking or clearly identifying what are sort of the investments into companies that actually have this transition in place or are sort of on a transition pathway towards a low carbon economy, as an example KPI.
Thank you very much. Moving slowly as well to the last questions. So we have discussed, and it has been as well mentioned several times, that exactly the definition of sustainable investment is at the responsibility of the asset manager as well. The EU Commission has been highlighting this again, that is in the responsibility of each one. We know that it would kill innovation if we would have a very rigid way of defining it for everyone the same way. However, if we think now, let's say from an investor perspective, or let's say taking our retail investors, for example, that maybe do not have a lot of knowledge, etc. So what is actually as well the responsibility today of a wealth manager, of a financial market participant, actually then towards the investor and their direct clients in times where, for example, uncertainty can be as well increased due to different definitions clearly. But as well here, like from an advisory perspective, so what are as well for your end now maybe new responsibilities or new focus areas that you need as well as an organization to focus at? Maybe as well, Sasha, taking you here.
Sure. I think we are sort of targeting retail and affluent clients with our investment solution. And I think generally transparency is key, right? So we would like to kind of provide our clients a very large amount of transparency and explain what we do, how we assess companies and why they are in our dark green investment funds and also investment themes, so that it's also understandable to the clients. And I think this is in a way a challenge to build this bridge, right, between our sophisticated investment approach and sustainability methodology and communicating to our clients, right? On the one side, we would kind of like to have the largest transparency. At the same time, we have to also find a translation of the jargon and the complex issues that we have discussed earlier, right? And this is as well also a journey. So how we approach this is basically that our clients can see all the holdings in the portfolios. They can see all the ratings that we have included and why a company, for instance, is a solution provider. As again, we only invest into companies that have a sort of a net positive contribution towards the SDGs based on our sustainability methodology. And but again, this is also always sort of will develop over time. And there we're also kind of, it's important to receive feedback from our clients. Do they understand it? Can they follow our argumentation? Would they like to see more or perhaps less? But again, here we're also very open to kind of receive this feedback and work with our clients that they really know what they get when they invest with us.
Rosa, maybe so from your perspective?
Yes, I mean, I often say that a financial institution, at least in my imagination, not always in reality, are a bridge between people with money and people with ideas. And on that bridge, you need to have the transparency that Sasha was mentioning about, both towards those people with money that give you the money to invest and to those people with ideas to whom you give the money to realize those ideas. And often it has not been the case. Often what has happened is that the financial institution have built a nice golden tower on this bridge and created, let's say, a sort of a barrier between the people with money, people with ideas, because this is actually what they were perceived as the value that they were creating. Actually, I believe there is a lot of value in creating awareness, and this is also what the regulator is stimulating. You referred before to MiFID. I mean, the MiFID, first of all, the MiFID II asked all us participants to the financial market to, let's say, educate our clients on risk return. We have collected all the information regarding the risk appetite of our clients in very different way. It's not only one question. You really need to investigate. You really need to educate. So the regulator has asked us to do that journey. Now, a lot of our clients already know what does it mean, risk, and actually what can happen. They can share with us their risk appetite. We need to provide them suitable solution for their risk appetite. And now the MiFID II, let's say, change that was implemented at the beginning of August 2022 goes into the direction of, okay, dear financial institution, when you are asking your clients about their risk profile, please also ask them about their sustainability preferences. So again, he's asking the financial institution to, let's say, start talking about sustainability with their clients, which means also, liberating yourself from the jargon, because client will ask questions in a different way with different wording than you will have to explain. So we have an additional role of that is the one of educating our clients and listen to their sustainability preferences and then provide them suitable solutions to their preferences. Clearly, also there is a big journey, because before being able as a financial institution to have a reasonable, a meaningful conversation with your clients, then you have, first of all, to have an internal education, because in all our institution, I'm perfectly sure that all the head of responsible investing, CS, or whatever you name them, are very competent on the topic, not necessarily the full organization is. So there is a lot happening today in all financial institutions in educating, actually, even Swiss self-regulation from, in terms of, the private banks now, as one of the points is that you need to educate your internal, your colleagues. And this is actually also one of the rules that we are having almost everywhere in the world. So educate your colleagues. So there is a lot of internal education of the financial institution that will allow the creation of awareness and meaningful conversation with the clients. Once that the clients actually are able to express their effective sustainability preferences, I believe we will see a lot more flows into responsible investing solution, or at least more conscious and aware choices. And this is also the reasoning behind the European regulator.
Probably then I, as a last, I would say so. First, I would say what Sasha and Rosa mentioned. I love the aspect of money and ideas. Particularly when it comes to ideas, the whole thing makes even more complicated with different asset class. Real estate, liquid assets, illiquid, etc. Meaning here, of course, it's not everything the same. And at the end, it's also to have data and information in place. Even you will have the best idea, you have to think about what is available at the current stage, what kind of information will be provided, how you collect that. And at the end, to only focus on data providers or rating agencies is very limited. And that's the reason why there is important that there are people, research guys, etc., and the teams behind of that link at the end the research work. It can be in the space of biodiversity, it can be in the space of circular investing, or name it, or water investments, but also with the tendency of where the market goes and where also the subsidies in the European Union goes. Keep in mind there will be the kind of the Climate Act in the European Union, and we open out the big bullet of subsidies, and then you will automatically see that this will go in electrolyzer, carbon capture technologies, etc. Meaning these are already indicators for sustainable investments in the future, and also to not lose and have to keep an eye on the goal is, we would like to reach the 1.5 climate target. What we would like to do, it's not only, yes, of course, it's about return, it's about sustainable products, make the world better, be innovative, but harming and too many restrictions can also harm the market. And then automatically, I assume we will not reach our climate goals that we have set, because we are currently already in the way of 1.6 degrees. And when we do not reach that, then we will have tax on everything that we currently calculate. We say carbon footprint, you will have then an annual taxation. And then it's painful. And then automatically you will not have any more this discussion of sustainable or not sustainable. There are two groups, and you will see then the tax rate or, the subsidies where it goes. But I think so it's also to have the big picture, and what Rosa mentioned also with the preferences at the end of the day. In European Union, you have to ask about taxonomy percentage. You have to ask about PI families, water, energy, meaning why you do these preferences in such a detailed manner. At the end is, even if you don't have the products, you will plan potentially to have that, because you will store the information of your client and say, look, we have developed the product. I see 50% of your clients ask for that, then okay, and let's do it.
If I may just add one note to pick up something that Antonio has mentioned, I think, and this is sort of my takeaway message, right? And call to other financial institutions. We all have to up the ante, right? We have to increase our ambitions because clearly, as Antonius mentioned, regarding climate targets, we are not on track. Regarding the SDGs, we are not on track, right? And while we are sort of kind of looking into the nitty-gritty in terms of providing transparency, which is good, and communicating, which is good, I think the wide, broad range of financial institutions really have to kind of look into their books and actually kind of step up. And we have to also see that we actually kind of move capital towards sustainability targets as sort of this regulation by the EU intended, and that we can also keep up in Switzerland with these developments. And I think this is key. And I think here we need to see big steps taking place in the next months and years. Otherwise, as Antonius mentioned, the risk will increase. There will be taxes that will be introduced. And of course, we would like also to kind of avoid that, those physical risks are actually increasing, and mitigate climate change as only one of the main topics. And again, there is 17 SDGs that we would like to achieve by 2030, and we are sort of nowhere near in doing that. So I think this is in a way should be like a call to action for private investors, for institutional investors, and the financial institutions to step up to the sustainability targets.
Many thanks, and as well, being conscious of time, we would dedicate now the last few seconds, minutes to the question that was posed in the Q&A. So basically what the question is about is, today is the date when asset managers have to report on principal adverse impacts, the PIs. How do you comply with this? And do you think many asset managers are still not up to the task?
Happy to start briefly. I mean, the unfortunate situation is that the regulator is asking financial institutions to report on PAI before making those, let's say, data mandatory for the corporates. So what happens is that today you do not find all the information, even if you want to pay for that. Actually, we have information on almost all the PAIs, but they are not very precise. One example, PAI 7. PAI 7 is on the biodiversity. There are data out there, but actually they are not very precise. In a lot of cases, they're just based on geolocation and matching the geolocation with some UNESCO data. So it's you will see a lot of reported data, but I see I don't think that this is as valuable as it will be maybe in a couple of years when CSRD will be in place, and then we will have the effective data from the companies. A lot of small asset managers will find extremely difficult to gather those data because they are very expensive with data providers. And I think that the initiative that the European Union has started, and we are participating to, is this net zero data utility platform. They are basically creating a platform to give access to the public to a lot of information for free. And this is actually the direction of travel. The direction of travel is mandatory for companies to report on data, and then those data being distributed for everybody to look at, so that you can use the data, you can have comparability. But honestly, we're not yet there. When you see what we are seeing is that asset managers are reporting that they consider PAI, but often they are considering only 3 PAIs: the one on fossil fuel, the one on controversial weapon, and the one on UN Global Compact, but they're not considering the others. They are not considering biodiversity, waste, water, all the others. So we will see alignment, but for the time being, of all the PAI that are mandatory, actually very few are trustworthy. Personal experience.
Maybe stating from our perspective, the PI reporting is available on our Article 9 funds on our website, where the financial products are listed. I invite you to have a look, and also in our PI reporting. Again, also here we try to kind of make it accessible to a retail reference client out there to kind of understand what is sort of this PI reporting about, what are those sort of negative impacts and how can I relate to that? So have a look at that. And again, we report the mandatory ones. And again, it will be quite interesting generally looking at the market, what is the status right now and how will sort of the PI reportings improve over time, right? Are you actually considering these aspects? Are you actually mitigating those negative aspects? That is quite interesting. But again, I think, and then the other aspect, what is also very interesting is then on the other side, positive impacts. And I think this will be also then very key in a sense, what is reported and how it is reported.
Well, probably to add here my last comment, I like Rosa's point regarding to the PI aspects for corporates. Here in particular, CSD is only one element. It will be CSDDD, meaning the due diligence directive in particularly. And the due diligence directive requests at the end that every company has to incorporate the principle of adverse impact indicators in their value chain. And of course, this is enormous effort for every company. And then they can easily report these to this European single access point of platform that will be developed in the European Union. But I think it's very imminent that these are kind of also public informations, that this should be for free. And we have also to think about potentially also for Swiss companies, such kind of a way or a platform, so that startups or new fintechs or existing players can use this information in the purpose to create impact at the end or a big contribution to kind of net zero goals and targets.
And I think it's interesting. This is now the CSDDD has actually just passed the EU parliamentary vote before we joined the webinar. So it's very topical.
Great that we can as well, be at time and as well take up the right and recent developments and see actually how complex and how every day is actually important within the current work that you all have. And thank you therefore very much for your fruitful discussions that we had today. It was very insightful, and we are looking forward actually to this time where we expect that hopefully more transparency around the different requirements will be disclosed. And from my side, thank you very much as well. And I will just hand over quickly to Arlette for the final.
So yes, just to mention, thank you very much for everybody to attending our webinar. And very fast, our next in-person event will take place on June 14 in Radicant at Zurich. So I am just leaving here the topic of circular economy, and register if you want to attend. Thank you very much, everybody, and to our panel speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
Thank you.